Welcome to this deep dive. It's great to have you with us, especially you, the learner. Today we're going to explore something, well, something we all navigate, often without really thinking about it, maybe without a map. Endings. Like
Mm.
the end of a big relationship.
Mhm.
Or leaving a job you've had for ages,
Mhm.
even just finishing a book sometimes, one that's been, a real companion. Why do these acts of leaving, why do they feel so charged,
Yeah.
so much heavier maybe than just carrying on?
That weight you're talking about, yeah, it really speaks to something fundamental in how our minds organize experience. Think about, say, an unfinished piece of music, a melody.
Okay.
The notes build up, a theme starts to emerge, and then it just cuts off abruptly.
Right, you're left hanging.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's this almost physical sense of something missing. You crave the resolution, the final chord.
Yeah.
And that's not just about liking tidy music. It actually reflects a really deep tendency in our brains. We seem wired to seek completion.
Absolutely. It feels like our minds are these natural pattern finishers, always trying to make things whole. So when something is left incomplete, like an argument that never got resolved or a dream you kind of abandoned, it creates this persistent buzz, the static in the background, kind of tension that just, I don't know, drains your focus a bit.
Precisely. These, we call them unfinished gestalts in Gestalt psychology. They stay active in our awareness, almost like they're demanding to be resolved.
They demand attention.
They do. And what's really fascinating is that, well, even if logically, consciously, we know we need to move on.
Yeah, you tell yourself, it's over, move on.
Right. But our emotions, they can lag way behind. Endings force us to confront, well, not just the thing ending out there, but also the change in us, the version of our identity that was sort of wrapped up with that experience.
Okay.
So letting go happens on, multiple levels. It's complex.
That makes a lot of sense. It's not just that the external thing, the anchor, is gone, but a part of how we defined ourselves is gone too.
It almost makes me think of, quantum leaps, how an electron can't be halfway between energy states.
Interesting analogy.
It has to fully let go of the old energy level to jump to the new one. Maybe we have these psychological thresholds too. You can't fully step into what's next if you're still kind of clinging to the leftovers of what was.
That's a powerful way to frame it, yes.
Oh, yeah.
And there's actually a known phenomenon, the Zeigarnik effect.
Mm.
It demonstrates this so well.
Oh, what's that?
It shows how unfinished tasks just stick in our minds much more persistently than completed ones.
Right, like that email you haven't sent yet, or the project that's half done.
Exactly those things. They tend to occupy more mental bandwidth. And interestingly, it's not always because they're objectively the most important things. It's simply because they're unresolved. Their open-loop nature keeps them active.
It's like having a browser tab open in your mind that you just can't close. That's a great modern analogy for it, yes. A background process that keeps running until you finally achieve some closure.
And it's fascinating how this pull towards completion is everywhere. You see it in the stories we tell, right?
Yeah, narratives.
Think about how satisfying a really well-resolved ending is in a book or a film.
Absolutely, catharsis.
Even something as basic as language.
Yeah.
It needs punctuation, right? Periods, commas. They create boundaries, structure, meaning.
Yes, they do.
Without those full stops, it would just be this endless, confusing stream of words. Chaos.
Indeed. Language itself provides that framework. Beginnings, middles, ends. It mirrors our cognitive need for structure, for things to make sense. Without that feeling of completion, meaning itself can become, well, elusive, hard to grasp.
Okay.
And it's this very human desire for coherence, for a complete picture that makes unresolved endings feel so uncomfortable, so unsettling.
But if they're so necessary, these endings, why do we resist them so much sometimes? What's fueling that resistance? I can't help but think it boils down to fear a lot of the time. Fear tied up with attachment and our sense of who we are.
I think you're absolutely right. We build connections, these bonds, and those bonds, they really do help shape our identity, our sense of self.
Sure, they become part of us.
So when those ties dissolve, whether it's a relationship or a role,
Yeah.
it forces us to grapple with that really fundamental question. Okay, who am I now without this?
The unknown.
The unknown self, exactly. That fear of the person you might become after the ending, that's a huge factor. Our attachments give us safety, belonging, and when they get disrupted, it can trigger some pretty primal anxieties, deep stuff.
So it forces a kind of internal renegotiation.
That's a good way to put it. A renegotiation of your internal landscape. And that process, well, it's inherently challenging. It takes energy, even if you know deep down that the ending is actually necessary for your growth.
Right. So maybe we need to shift how we think about them entirely. Instead of seeing endings as just stopping points or failures even, can we reframe them? See them as acts of creation.
Yes, create.
Like every conclusion clears the way, makes space for something totally new to emerge.
Opens potential.
And it lets you step back, maybe. Like an artist has to step back from the canvas to really see the whole picture, gain perspective.
That's a lovely image, stepping back to see the whole.
So today, let's really dig into how these ideas, especially from Gestalt psychology, might shed some light on this, on how to maybe leave well.
Yes, that shift, moving from seeing endings as just termination to seeing them as integral parts of transformation, that's really key.
Yeah.
And a central concept from Gestalt that helps us here is figure ground organization. It's all about perception.
Figure ground, okay.
It's about how our minds constantly experience.
Yep.
What stands out right now, that's the figure, and everything else just fades into the background. That's the ground.
Okay, let's connect that directly to endings then. How does our focus, our figure, shift when something significant is coming to a close?
Okay, well, think about those classic optical illusions. You know, the one with the vase and the two faces.
Oh yeah, sure, the Rubens vase.
Right. Both patterns are physically there on the page, but you can only perceive one as the main figure at any single moment. Your brain chooses one, and the other becomes the background.
You switch between them.
You switch. So when we're approaching an ending, say, leaving a job, things that were previously just part of the background, like the daily commute, the coffee machine ritual, the way a certain colleague hums, they can suddenly pop out, become the sharp figure.
Things you barely noticed before.
Exactly. Or subtle dynamics in a relationship that's ending, they come into focus because the main pattern, the job itself, the relationship as it was, is starting to dissolve.
So it's almost like our mind is doing a final inventory, bringing all these overlooked details into the spotlight just before the transition.
Precisely. It's the brain's attempt, you could say, to create a complete picture, to achieve that sense of wholeness before the actual shift happens.
It's not just pulling out, it's processing.
Yes. Because we're not just, extracting ourselves from the situation like pulling a tooth. We're actually reorganizing the internal structures, the ways of being that were shaped by that situation.
Right.
And becoming aware of those previously ground elements, noticing them, is actually a crucial part of that reorganization process.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense now. It's purposeful, not random. It's preparing for the change.
Yeah.
And what about this other idea, the field? You mentioned that, the totality of experience. How does that wider context shape how we experience endings?
Right, the field. In Gestalt terms, the field is everything that makes up your experience in this very moment, all interconnected. Your thoughts, your feelings, what your body is sensing, the environment around you.
Right.
It's all one dynamic system. It's not just separate bits. So thinking about endings from this field perspective really highlights something important. Our experience is shaped less by the objective facts of the situation, I am leaving this company, and much more by the subjective context we create through where we place our attention within that field.
So two people could go through the exact same ending. Maybe they both get laid off from the same team.
Identical external event.
But their internal experience, their emotional landscape could be completely different, just depending on what they focus on.
Exactly right. Person A might fixate only on the lost income, the lost security, the fear. That becomes their dominant figure. Person B might focus on the relief from a stressful environment, the new freedom, the opportunity to retrain. A different figure, different field.
So our attention is like a filter, or maybe a spotlight.
A spotlight is a good way to think of it. It illuminates certain aspects of the field while other aspects remain in shadow. And if we let that spotlight get stuck on, say, regret or bitterness or fear, well, that inevitably colors the entire experience of the ending. Everything feels negative.
But, and this sounds like the hopeful part, if we can consciously adjust that spotlight, widen the beam maybe, intentionally shift our focus,
then the entire field, the entire subjective experience can actually transform. It's quite powerful. By consciously choosing to attend to maybe gratitude for what was good, or the lessons learned, or the possibilities that are now opening up, we cultivate a much more expansive and ultimately, I think, a more constructive experience of saying farewell, a healthier one.
Feels less like being a victim of the ending and more like participating in the transition.
Precisely, and this connects to another Gestalt idea, isomorphism, this idea of a mirroring, a correspondence between patterns inside us and patterns outside us. When we consciously choose to perceive an ending not just as loss, but as an opportunity for renewal, our internal state starts to align more harmoniously with the natural ebb and flow of life itself.
Okay, so we've got the figure ground shifts, bringing details into focus. We've got the field, shaped by our attention. Let's circle back to those open gestalts again, the unfinished business. Why are they so critical when we're trying to navigate endings well, trying to leave well?
Well, these open gestalts, the incomplete experiences, the unresolved situations, they create this persistent psychological tension. It's like a low hum of unfinished business that just lingers until it's addressed somehow.
Yeah, I know that, huh?
It acts like a sort of nagging mental loop, subtly consuming our attention, our energy, keeping us partly stuck in the past.
That lingering resentment from an argument you never cleared up, or maybe words you wish you'd said but didn't.
Yeah.
They just keep replaying.
Exactly. And it's important to realize it's not just the memory itself that's the issue, it's the absence of a feeling of completion. That lack keeps our minds actively engaged, still searching for resolution, even years later sometimes. And the paradox here is that while finally achieving closure on these things does alleviate the tension, the actual act of confronting them, well, that can feel really uncomfortable in the moment.
Yeah, facing it is the hard part.
It often requires us to engage with the difficult emotions, anger, sadness, guilt, maybe. Or sometimes it means re-examining our own role in how things played out, which isn't always flattering.
So the natural human tendency might just be to sidestep them.
Yeah.
Avoid those uncomfortable loose ends, especially when you're trying to move forward into something new.
It's very tempting, yes, sweep it under the rug. But that avoidance, unfortunately, actually prolongs their hold on us. It keeps them active.
So ignoring them keeps them alive, in a way.
In a psychological sense, yes. Avoiding the discomfort of confronting these open gestalts can trap us, maybe in cycles of rumination, just going over and over the same ground mentally. And crucially, it prevents us from fully investing our energy and attention in new beginnings. Part of us is still tied up back there.
The energy is stuck. It can't flow forward into the future.
That's a perfect way to put it. The energy remains bound to the past.
Okay, so if avoidance doesn't work, how do we get to that sense of completion? How do we close these gestalts? What's the mechanism for resolution?
Often, the real catalyst for closure is insight, that sudden dawning of understanding, where things just click and fall into place in a new way.
The aha moment.
The aha moment,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's usually more than just an intellectual understanding, like solving a math problem. It's often deeper, more felt, more visceral, a comprehension that lands in your body almost.
Okay.
In the context of endings, that insight might be sparked by something quite small or unexpected, finding an old letter, a chance remark from someone, a dream, something that just allows you to perceive the whole situation from a slightly different angle, a new vantage point.
And suddenly the scattered pieces form a coherent picture that makes sense in a new way.
Yes, and Gestalt psychology really emphasizes that this kind of insight often arises, well, organically. It emerges when we allow ourselves the space for genuine reflection and contemplation. You can't always force it on a deadline.
It needs the right conditions.
Precisely. Intentional practices can help create those conditions. You might even think of them as personal rituals, perhaps.
Like what kind of practices?
Oh, it could be many things. Journaling is a common one. Spending quiet time in nature. Engaging in some form of creative expression. Painting, music, writing. Or simply allowing for periods of quiet introspection without distraction.
Letting the mind wander constructively.
Yes. These practices can help us start to recognize the underlying patterns, the connections within our experiences, maybe connections we missed before, and recognizing those isomorphic links we talked about, the mirroring between our inner state and the outer situation. That can be a particularly powerful form of insight. It can reveal a new pathway forward.
So as we start to wrap this up, we've really journeyed through this whole landscape of endings, looking at it through this Gestalt perspective. We've seen how figure ground dynamics shift, how things that were background noise can suddenly come into sharp focus as we prepare to leave something.
Yes, that final inventory, almost. And we explored the concept of the field, reminding us that our subjective experience isn't just about the event itself, but it's profoundly shaped by where we direct our attention within the whole context.
Right. And by consciously broadening that focus, choosing where to look, we can actually shift our experience away from purely loss towards seeing growth and future possibility too.
Absolutely. That power of attention is key.
And those open gestalts, the unresolved stuff, we saw how they act like this persistent drag on our mental energy.
Unfinished business.
And that confronting them, facing the discomfort, is actually essential if we want to free ourselves up to fully embrace whatever comes next.
It is an insight, that sudden shift in understanding that aha often acts as the key that unlocks the closure we need.
Which doesn't just happen, but comes when we make space for it. Through reflection, maybe specific practices.
Exactly. Creating the conditions for insight allows us to integrate these experiences, even the difficult ones, and move forward with, ideally, greater clarity.
So ultimately, this idea of leaving well, it sounds like it's less about the physical act of departure and more about this internal process of integration, like weaving the threads of all our experiences, even those that are ending, into the bigger ongoing tapestry of our lives.
Beautifully put. Integration is a great word for it.
And it seems like that requires embracing the uncertainty, the ambiguity that always comes with transition, and maybe resisting that urge to just jump immediately into the next thing, the next beginning.
Yes, allowing for that space in between. And we also touched on that idea that nothing truly ends in a vacuum, did we?
Right, the echoes.
Endings leave imprints, they shape what follows. That resonates with the Gestalt principle of isomorphism. Again, patterns repeating across different levels. And this really challenges our tendency to see things in a very binary way. Beginning or ending, good or bad. It suggests more of a continuous cycle of transformation.
So perhaps the real freedom, the real liberation, isn't about trying to avoid endings altogether.
Which is impossible anyway.
Right. But maybe it lies in developing our skill, our capacity, to navigate them consciously, to allow them to be part of our continuous evolution.
Ongoing evolution.
If endings are really like thresholds, like doorways, then maybe life itself is just this perpetual act of crossing from one space to another.
I like that image. Perpetual crossing. And think back just one last time to that unfinished symphony.
Okay.
Every time a musical phrase concludes, every ending passage, it's really just a pause, isn't it? A necessary breath before the next movement begins.
A transition built into the music.
Exactly. So leaving well, perhaps, could be understood as becoming more attuned to that larger rhythm, learning to join the flow of this ongoing composition, contributing our own unique notes without clinging too tightly, too desperately to any single phrase or section.
Letting go of the need for permanence in each note.
Yes, which brings us maybe to a final thought for you, the learner, to consider on your own.
If endings aren't truly final destinations, but actually integral parts of this continuous process of becoming, how might really taking that on board reshape your approach to new beginnings? What possibilities might unfold for you when you fully embrace the cyclical nature of experience, the constant ebb and flow? That's really an open question, isn't it? An invitation, perhaps, to continue your own deep dive into the ever-evolving, ever-unfolding symphony of your own life